So the theme of this year's annual report is being part of a movement. And I encourage you all to take a look at the annual report when you have a moment. And if you're here tonight and you're a supporter of YWCA as a donor or a program participant, then you are an important part of this movement towards equity. We need people like you to continue to help prioritize this important work in your organizations, in your neighborhoods, and in local and national governments. Speaking of which, a quick shout out to Michelle Wu and to all of you who helped elect the first woman of color as mayor of the city of Boston. I'm sure a lot of you played an important part in that achievement. So this evening, we've got a big program planned for you, and we'll be recognizing outgoing and incoming board members. Our board represents the racial, gender, and sector diversity that's so critical to effective decision-making and organizational success. I'm proud to report that at YWCA's board of directors, we have 84% women and 74% people of color. And it takes a lot of hard work and commitment to prioritize equity, but we know that hard work pays off, and diverse voices with different perspectives leads to success in our organizations and in the larger community. In just a few moments, Beth will share more details about YWCA's work and programs over the past year. And then we'll be hearing from Dr. Makeeba McCreary, who is the executive director.
Take care, Connor. Thanks, buddy.
Of the
Thanks for all your hard work.
Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund. We'll also introduce our 2 new board members and thank 2 dedicated members who are leaving the board. This has been a year of growth for YWCA as demand for our work increases. Last year, we reported that InclusionBoston, our 13-month evidence-based program that helps organizations to create necessary cultural shifts that support more inclusive policies and practices, reached 17 organizations and 368 participants. Over the past year, we have doubled that and worked with 36 organizations and 709 individuals. Just with that one program. Needless to say, in order to manage this growth, our staff has had to grow to meet this demand, and we've added 10 new positions over the past year, bringing our staff from 25 to 35 people. It's safe to say that we could not have managed that without the philanthropic support so many of you generously provide. In turn, we work to provide you with resources and tools as well. For example, our monthly newsletter, The Leader, the book list and postcards with people of color-owned businesses, our programs such as Stand Against Racism each April with curated content, discussion questions, and pledge boards, and so much more. And of course, our major event, the Academy of Women Achievers Luncheon, which hopefully will be in person this next June. And I'm hoping that most of you will be able to sponsor a table or a half table at the Academy of Women Achievers Luncheon. And we are going to be celebrating some extraordinary women. So this year, the event will be held on June 15th at the Westin Copley Place Hotel. And I'm thrilled to announce our 2022 awardees. Oh, and in case some of you have forgotten, Dr. Ujima McCreery was one of our awardees last year. So this coming year, we will be honoring Evelyn Barahona from the Latino Equity Fund, Saskia Epstein from PNC Bank, Janae Osterheld from the Boston Globe, Allison Feaster from the Boston Celtics, and our Sylvia Farrell Jones awardee is Michelle Tatt from Cohere Health. Before I turn over to Beth, who'll tell you more about our year and share information about the sale of YWCA's building earlier this month, I want to share a short video about YWCA and our work.
YWCA, our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. We are the first YWCA in the country, and now specifically we're focusing on helping organizations create more inclusive environments so that women, people of color, and especially women of color can thrive at all levels within an organization.
One thing that we really love about YW is the ability to customize the program. To be able to take the multiple curricula that you have and create it in a way that we present it to our employees at different levels, different areas of focus.
We have our diversity, equity, inclusion services, which include our workshops, InclusionBoston and LeadBoston. We have advocacy work, which looks to promote and support changes in public policy. And we have our F.Y.R.E program, which works with middle school girls and helps them live into their power.
It's really about empowering girls to be change makers within their communities.
What inspired me to to want to be a part of Lead Boston was primarily my lack of knowledge of the power players in Boston and how they all interconnect to make Boston what it is. One of the key aspects of leadership is being able to communicate even when it feels uncomfortable, because that discomfort is the beginning of true growth.
Through Lead Boston, I realized that just leading or communicating through the lens of what is my experience was simply not enough, and that I needed to gain a deeper understanding and respect and humility for the experiences of others.
And so if you care about your employees, that's a reason why you should care about diversity, equity, inclusion. There's also the value proposition, which is organizations perform better when they have and they're able to integrate diversity in leadership positions. They're more creative, their revenue numbers are better, they're more stable, so there's value financially in being a more inclusive organization. The moral imperative, the value imperative, the business imperative. As a successful organization, you need to care about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Great. All right. Thank you for that video. I just want to close out before I hand over to Beth by thanking all of you, not just for coming tonight, but for continuing to support the work that we do. I also want to thank our board of directors. We have an incredible board of directors who, give so much time and energy. I want to thank every member of the YWCA staff, because none of us would be able to we wouldn't be doing anything without all of you, each and every one of you. But then, and also all the organizations, whether it's from schools to businesses who engage in this work and recognize that building equity in our community is important. And last and definitely not least, I want to thank our CEO, Beth Chandler, who has been absolutely fantastic to work with. It is my absolute pleasure to serve with her and support. She's an incredible leader. So I'm going to turn it over to her now to take us forward. Thank you.
Marguerite, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and also for all the work that you do as leader of our board of directors and your dedication to our mission. Really appreciate everything. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our 2021 annual meeting. As Marguerite said, I too wish that we were going to be in person, and I certainly hope this is the last virtual event that we have for many a year. This is an important time for us to be able to raise a glass to you. I would actually raise a glass to you, but we're having some work done on our kitchen, so I can't access any glasses. But know that I am mentally raising a glass to you. To all our supporters, to thank you for helping us thrive this year and in previous years. Before I continue, I do want to do a land acknowledgement of the Massachusetts people on whose land our building and many of our staff reside. I want to thank them for all of their contributions, past and present, and also want to ensure that we are all intentional about using native lands. If you are new to YWCA or simply need a refresher, I just want to share a little bit about who we are and what we do. We have been at the forefront of equity work for over 150 years. Through our DE&I services, which include InclusionBoston and LeadBoston, as well as our advocacy work and our F.Y.R.E initiative, we help individuals and organizations change policies, practices, attitudes, and behaviors with a goal of creating more inclusive environments where women, people of color, and especially women of color can thrive. It is through this work that we pursue our greater mission, which is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Tonight, we are debuting our annual report. This year's theme is being part of a movement. And we really want to thank you, our donors, our partners, and our program participants. By partnering with YWCA, you are a part of a broader movement towards long overdue concrete change. On one hand, this movement is simple, right? Yet on the other, it is so complicated to execute. Inequities are embedded in everything from our policies and practices, even to our own implicit biases. This movement is hard work, yet its goals of racial and gender equity are essential for all who care about living in a fair and just society, and for the individuals who have lived with the implications of racism and sexism for far too long. The pandemic forced YWCA to focus on what is important. There have been many unknowns, but the board, like our staff, believed we could carry out this important work, and despite uncertainty, gave us the green light to invest in our staff and our infrastructure to move our organization and this city forward. The events of the summer of 2020, with the murders of Black individuals, including George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and Ahmaud Arbery, led to a significant increase in demand for our work. Yet we feared that demand would recede in 2020. Thankfully, Boston's corporate and nonprofit organizations continue to recognize the importance of this work and the need to look internally at barriers to equity. As a result, we have expanded our DEI services, including hiring more staff, expanding content, and continuing our rigorous research and evaluation of our programming. I want to share an exciting new development that as of November 1st, we sold our building. So we officially sold 140 Clarendon Street. And the building has been headquarters for YWCA for almost a century, providing a mix of residential, educational, recreational, including a pool that many may remember, and administrative spaces. While this was not an easy decision for the board to make, it was a necessary one. The time and resources involved in maintaining a mixed-use building really took away from our core mission. So I'm excited that the new owners, Beacon Communities and the Mount Vernon Company, will preserve the many well-known cultural and educational organizations located at 140 Clarendon, including the Lyric Stage Theater, Boston Snowden School, and our own offices for YWCA. Beacon will also increase the number of permanently affordable apartments from 79 to 210. And of the 210, 111 will be set aside for individuals experiencing homelessness, who will be supported by both Beacon and the Pine Street Inn. And I ask you not to share this information too broadly because the governor is very excited about this development and will be making a public announcement himself. But I wanted to share it to you since you are part of our community. The proceeds from the sale of the building will be invested, and the investment income will replace previous income from the building operations, supporting YWCA's mission and work long into the future. The investments are very important to YWCA's long-term sustainability and will supplement, and I'm going to repeat that, supplement our revenue from philanthropic support from individuals, foundations, and sponsors, and from our own groundbreaking programs. This is a win-win for the city of Boston and for YWCA, and ultimately our mission to eliminate racism and empower women. And again, I want to be clear that we still will need your resources to continue the important work that we're doing. You may remember that our F.Y.R.E initiative launched just before the pandemic in the fall of 2019. F.Y.R.E empowers middle school girls through a curriculum incorporating social justice education, positive identity development, and civic engagement. And despite the challenges of updating our curriculum for virtual sessions, we have continued to grow the program and our connections with students. In this past June, we held our first ever F.Y.R.E symposium, where we celebrated our students' growth as part of the program and heard from speakers such as Representative Liz Miranda. Our DEI services have seen a large spike in demand. Our inclusive leadership program, LeadBoston, graduates its class of 2021 tomorrow and welcomes the class of 2022 in January. And the program will also celebrate its 30th anniversary at the end of the month. And while the program looks different with virtual program days, our current participants have participated and appreciated the connection they found, and they better understand their leadership qualities, the current state of inequities in Boston, and how to lead their organizations to better meet the needs of the community. Our Inclusion Boston team continues to grow. Inclusion Boston is a long-term partnership with organizations looking to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. By adding new staff and growing our capacity, we are able to equip institutions across Boston with the skills they need to meet any and all DEI challenges. We continue to build the evaluation aspect of our Inclusion Boston partnership. And if you would like to learn more, I invite you to join us on December 8th for our Elevating Lives, our second event, Measuring Equity Inclusion, where YWCA staff will share how we measure the impact of our work. We also recognize that making our city and state more inclusive requires engaging in the legislative process. One crucial part of that work is our advocacy committee, which plans and executes our advocacy work. In this past year, we refiled our parity on boards legislation to increase the racial and ethnic diversity on Massachusetts boards and commissions. YW is the leader of the Parity on Boards Coalition, which includes 26 other coalition members. We hope to get this legislation passed in 2022 and invite you to join us at parityonboard.org. And you are a crucial part of YWCA's movement. I want to take a moment to talk about 2 ways you can continue to help us grow and meet Boston's needs. The first is to make referrals. Referrals serve as one of the biggest drivers of new business. So we thank all of you who have spread the word about the importance of our work and what we can accomplish together. Please continue to consider how institutions that you are a part of can further their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey working with us, and how we can support them on those goals. And feel free to connect them with me or anyone on staff. Second, I also ask you to continue to help us meet our fundraising goals. If you would like to increase your impact, please consider either joining our Persimmon Society, which contribute $1,000 or more in a calendar year, or by becoming a trailblazer, which includes those who donate monthly. We have recently revamped benefits for both the Persimmon Society and our trailblazers, so please check them out on our website. And thank you again for your support of our work to help create a more inclusive city of Boston. And I hope that you will continue to support this work through your time, talents, and treasures, and through sharing our content and programs with others. I also hope that you continue to not only be a part of the movement, but be a leader in this movement. You have and continue to make all the difference. Thank you. And now I'd like to shift to the next part of our program. As I mentioned earlier, we at YWCA did not know where we would be after 2020's racial reckoning. And I am thankful for all the institutions who have continued this work alongside us, such as the New Commonwealth Racial Equity Fund, or NCF, a coalition founded by Black and Brown executives from Massachusetts' leading corporations. I am honored to welcome their first president as our keynote speaker, Dr. Makeeba McCreery. The New Commonwealth Racial Equity Fund is united to support Black and Brown communities amid the COVID-19 pandemic in the wake of the brutal killing by police of George Floyd. Prior to joining NCF, Makeeba worked to increase diverse perspectives at Boston's MFA Museum, or Museum of Fine Arts. Makeeba is also a 2020 YWCA Academy of Women Achievers Award recipient. Throughout her career, she has worked to make her native Boston a more equitable and inclusive city. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Makeeba McCreery.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be here, and I'm so proud to stand by you, Beth and Marguerite, in your leadership, and really to be able to say that it's a continued path forward. It's beautiful to know that you go from one part of your journey to another, and you have some really strong, incredible, particularly women of color standing next to you as you continue down that path. So it's lovely to see both of you here. I did just join the New Commonwealth Fund, and I am entering my 9th week. It feels like much longer, but I'm on month 2, and I've had the privilege of doing something I don't know that you ever really expect, which is to find yourself sort of mid further career, and you get to start a startup. You get to start everything from scratch, and you get to do so in partnership with 19 plus incredible individuals who put aside their C-suite positionality in order to come together and say that they were going to take on something as hefty as ending systemic racism. And they did so by rolling up their sleeves and raising almost $30 million to date. So I walk in also in a privileged position that they got me a pretty good head start towards the $100 million goal. I spent the first couple of weeks listening, meeting grantees. We make investments across the Commonwealth, and certainly no surprise to any of you, the work that is happening is phenomenal, and it's happening both in very small places with small organizations and with large organizations as well. So I'm very Boston centric. I got a chance to start to meet people who are doing work in other parts of the state. And I look forward to being able to share more deeply that work with all of you as we move forward. Beth gave me the opportunity to share some of the things that I've been thinking about and coming to conclusion on over the past couple months. And so I thought I would share that with you. I'm going to share my screen, just take you through a few slides. So New Commonwealth Fund, as we mentioned, was started about 18 months ago. And the theory of change is all really focused around this idea that racism is systemic. We make that claim, and that we also say that it's time for it to be gone. It's time to end that. How do you take on something that is so entrenched, something that feels so large, so immovable, so hurtful, so damaging, so destructive? I've had a chance to really talk to a lot of folks in philanthropy and been encouraged, frankly, to stay away from philanthropizing our work. That's my new word. And so we are thinking about this, the levers of change being, quite frankly, very simple. It's about people and it's about systems. It's about investing in the people who are doing work. It's about believing that the systems that they have in place don't need us to come in and tinker and tell them how to get it right. And that is one of the ways that I am encouraged to not start to build layers of hierarchy and the telling of sort of one large entity that happens to have resources, which is of course what all of our nonprofits desperately need. And we end up with the privilege of sort of being able to say, here's what we want to see you do, rather than say, I see what you're doing and I want you to do more of it. We also firmly believe that Black and Brown leaders have been under-resourced, in particular in the Boston systems of philanthropy, but also across the Commonwealth and certainly across the country. And so we believe in their leadership, and we believe that if folks are working in communities of color, serving communities of color, and they are able to amplify that work, that we want to be a part of that. We want to open the floodgates and make sure that we are acknowledging that in a system of investment, as opposed to a system of grant making, and I'm going to talk about language in a minute, is really incredibly empowering. And it also gives over the notion that you have a lot of respect for the work that's happening, but the systems and structures are in place. And they are in place in, again, very small ways on people's porches, running soup kitchens and finding ways to make sure that single moms are have housing for their children in the middle of a pandemic. And then they are in place in some really incredible ways across policy, pushing for vaccine access and education. So we want to make sure that we continue to lift up the folks, the individuals who are doing that work, but also the systems that they are interrupting and also reconstructing. I'm going to talk about the power of language now. You know, this notion that that we are grant makers and that we have to fundraise in order to be able to give away this money is real. That's the real challenge. But I had a chance to sit around with some colleagues that are also running some incredible philanthropic enterprises, and we talked about the idea that really it's all about investment, right? It's about us making an investment in ourselves, as the entity that has the ability to move forward and garner resources and then flood them out. And so I like to think of this as a cycle of investment in ourselves, investment in those doing the work. And then that work then reinvests in the systems that are going to grow and become stronger and help us get to this goal of ending systemic racism. I also like to think about the notion that there's the ending of systemic racism, but there's also the amplifying of equitable investment and also thinking about the positive and I'm blanking on the word right now, but thinking about how we amplify the really beautiful positive aspects of our communities and the work that's happening. Perhaps part of it is ending something, but actually the other part of it is making something else much bigger. And I want to think about that more as we move forward, but I would invite you to consider that language often is the thing that sort of pushes us in a direction, and often easier to move forward than it is to go backwards and take something apart. The power of power. So one of the elements of New Commonwealth Fund is the notion of trust-based philanthropy, and this idea that we want to make sure that we are shifting power, that we are being entering relationships with the full respect of those for whom we are bringing resources. And that's a really tough sort of thing to straddle. It's quite frankly really hard when you have something to give and there's somebody who needs it and they're receiving it, to make sure that you are always acknowledging that there's an equal partnership in that relationship and in that exchange. That's something that we want to make sure forward and so to that end, we've been talking a lot about measurement. How do you consider evaluating the effectiveness of somebody that you've invested in, an organization that you've brought resources to? And so I am thinking about a model that would actually say, Beth, you tell us how you want to be measured for success, both in an area where you feel like you have a strength, where you really bring it, but also perhaps in a space where you think that you want to spend the next year getting stronger. And so Beth goes into this experience, this exchange of information, and she thinks about her community building efforts and her policy efforts. She thinks about the strength of her infrastructure and whether she knows how to bring in all of the fundraising resources that she needs, or maybe she needs some support in defining what that looks like. Narrative, how she tells her story, what the impact of the work is, as opposed to evaluative language. You know, it's really about, where is this landing? Where's the strength going to end up when she's doing the work on a day-to-day basis? And how is she sharing everything that her organization, her team, her other relationships that are amplified? How is she sharing that information in other sectors, in her own sector, with other leaders? And not every single one of these bubbles would necessarily light up, because maybe it's not actually the thing that Beth's organization needs to focus on as it relates to community building. That might not be the work that she's going to bring, but she really has a strong ability to collect data, to understand qualitative information, and to package it. And so her impact bubble is gonna be strong. But Marguerite, you know, she may have the reverse imagery, and she may really have a strong policy bubble. And if both of these entities were able to come together and to share their strengths and to think about creating an ecosystem and a sort of net of safety nets, where they both help each other grow stronger in different areas, but also they're able to be honest and forthcoming and transparent about the areas that they want to work on. Not that it's a deficit that she needs to get stronger in the policy space, but that she's acknowledging that's what's going to tell me if I have grown, if I have achieved the success that I want to over a period of time. And that's how the New Commonwealth Fund would think about metrics and evaluation and accountability, our own accountability to both Beth and Marguerite in the work that they're doing. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is the power of a story. again, this gets back a little bit to the language conversation, but we are flooded with imagery all of the time that tells us a story. It tells us a story of Black and brown men, women, children, communities. And unfortunately, frankly, this is what we see. We see a lot of the negative imagery. We see all of the stories of pain and heartache and tragedy. And I would propose that we all start owning the ability to share imagery that is really about love and about humanity and about our strength and about our successes. And you had a gentleman who was in one of your classes, Beth, Thaddeus Miles, who took on a final project, and it was the Black Joy Project. And he took imagery throughout the year of Black and brown individuals in moments of joy. And he was gracious enough to share this imagery with the New Commonwealth Fund. And so this is what we are going to show people. This is what we are going to say our story is. This is my favorite in the whole world. Because this is who we are. And the more that we flood this type of imagery across the airwaves, the more we tell these stories, then I would say that we are actually getting much, much closer to telling the true story of our communities and our assets and our strength. Thank you.
Makeeba, thank you so much. That was great. I could probably ask 1,000 questions, but I won't. I do have a couple I'm going to start with, and then we'll certainly open it up for Q&A. And so the first one's a little personal. I think my first two will be personal. The first is you shared, I think both Marguerite and I alluded to the fact as well that you're a native Bostonian. You have worked in many influential organizations, from the MFA here in the city to the Boston Public Schools and others in between. And so what was the impetus at this moment to take this particular role?
I remember hearing the news about folks who I knew. I knew a lot of these names. I was friendly with many of them. And it was the first time that I've seen in this city people who had something to lose, people of color who had something to lose, who had worked really hard for their positions in their respective corporations, be willing to step out and say, we're going to do this together, and we are going to do it unapologetically, and we are going to set aside our individual CSR, imperatives. And we're going to take on this big thing called racism, something that we have been challenged with our entire careers. And we're going to call it out, because losing lives on national television in a celebratory fashion is absolutely unacceptable. And we are not going to stand for that. We're not going to stand for those images and that reality to be true. I had no idea that I was going to have the opportunity to join in a leadership role, but I just remember thinking, whatever they need, whatever I can do, like, I'm going to be there. And it was just a source of personal pride. So, I think, moments come and you're called and you either go or you don't. And I went.
We're happy that you did, and I'm sure they are as well. And so you're there, you started, you said, one of the things that's exciting is at this point in your career, thinking of this as a startup. So what would you like your legacy to be, and what would you like people to think about you once you depart from this work?
I don't say this lightly. I don't know that the legacy is not about me. I mean, the legacy is actually really about more of me's coming along. Of knowing that there have been spaces created for young people of color, young women, young men, who don't have to try to guess and figure out what the rules are and how to, get into the right rooms or have the right conversations or even be seen. And so part of my answer is, I really think the legacy is that we flood the C-suites with folks who look like us and frankly start to balance out the field a lot. But personally, as far as NCF's concerned, I really would love to be able to know that across the Commonwealth, we've created just that sort of constellation of connections, those nodes, where organizations are able to start to say, I need something, and somebody else is able to say, I've got that, I've got you. And we can do that for ourselves. We can do that for one another. We can do that with our white allies, and they can do that with us as well. And that's what I would love to have be in place.
Great. So one of the things you mentioned was talking about the power of language. And so something that we've talked about a lot internally at YW is this notion of power with as opposed to power over. And in thinking about, again, some of the things you shared, are there other strategies that you're thinking about to really try to level the playing field with your grantees? Because as you mentioned, there's often, whether we acknowledge it or not, this tension between those that are granting money and those that are receiving. And so, what are some of the other ways that you're being intentional about trying to level that?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I do think this notion of metrics of evaluation is a really tough tool. It can be a hammer. And so I hope that there are opportunities for us to be able to change that, to shift that way of thinking, so that there's also a reality that we are accountable to both the folks that we're investing in, but also to the folks who are investing in us, right? Because we're also in many ways the recipient of grants, of money, of investment. I also think being able to just always be a part of the conversation, to be able to ask first instead of tell first, to be able to really pause and unphilanthropy, right? Not start to build up all of those rules and those walls that unfortunately do exist for other philanthropic entities, but we have not ever had we don't have them yet. So not to fall into the trap of thinking that there's that necessary hierarchy to put in place.
Do you think it makes a difference that many of the organizations you're funding, and perhaps all of them, are led by Black and Brown people, given that you yourself identify as a Black person, the organization was started by Black and Brown people? Do you think that helps to perhaps make people feel a little more comfortable and reduce some of that in the power inequity?
Listen, I think it's important to acknowledge Black and Brown leadership. And that we're here and we're present and we're capable of leading in ways that are far surpassing what's often been made way for. But that doesn't mean that we need to do it alone. That doesn't mean that there are not, as I mentioned before, white allies that are also doing really incredible work in Black and Brown communities. And frankly, where we really need them to be, in white communities, doing that work as well. And I know that's something that you talk about a lot, Beth, and that you think about a lot, is how do we make sure that the education is happening in and with folks who are taking accountability for their own communities, their own perspectives. I can't do that in the same way for somebody who's white as they can do for themselves. I can give them my perspective, but I don't have theirs. So I think there's room for everyone at the table.
That is very true. And if we're going to really eliminate racism, we got to get everybody at the table. And are other organizations reaching out to you? Because this is in some ways, I think, a very different approach to grant making, and particularly thinking about your approach to evaluation. And how it is really in partnership with organizations in thinking about where are things that they can leverage across other organizations and supporting their growth and development. I mean, often I will admit, as an organization, it's sometimes hard to tell a funder where your weaknesses are because you're afraid you're going to get dinged for that, right? But you guys are actually encouraging folks to do that, which I think is wonderful. Are you getting other organizations to reach out to you to say, hey, we can learn from you and think about them, how they might change how they operate?
Look, we're the new kids on the block, right? So actually, I've been reaching out to other colleagues to say, help me understand how you think about this. And everyone's in the same kind of space. Everybody is that I respect in any case, those are the people I've reached out to, they are saying the same thing. How do we shift this paradigm? It's critical that our work really be rethought. And so they're willing to sort of be in it with me, and I'm learning from them. And I think they're also benefiting from the fact that I don't have as many hampering strings. And so they're sort of pushing me and saying, go, 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 test it out. Let's see what it looks like. Sorry, I've got some background noise here.
That's quite all right. You have a dog, I have a bunny. So it's okay with the noise. So one of the things that particularly 2 summers ago, I was often asked, is this a movement? Is this a moment? Part of me, the sarcastic part of me, wanted to say, we've been doing this work for 150 years. What do you think? But, I often did not say that, but love to get your thoughts on what you've seen over certainly the past couple of years, but even before then, where we are, since you're having conversations with lots of folks. What do you think? Movement, moment, question still, you're not sure what the answer is yet.
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly transparent, I think that when we were in the middle of it all, and George Floyd, Mr. Floyd had just been murdered, and we were in the middle of this pandemic, I would have said to you, I think for white people, this is a moment. And I think that what has to happen is that for us, it needs to become a movement. And so neither are, true at the same time. I think right now we have an opportunity to make this our work, right? And I even worry about it being a movement because I worry that when it's, the models of movements that we have, they ellipse at some point, and we move on to the next wave that, rises. And so I'd love to know that we can sort of sustain the energy behind this work, because it's critical, it's necessary, and if we stop working on it, right, it's pervasive. Like power is the thing that has found its way into so many different structures and systems over time, and it always pushes sort of one entity or one set of priorities to the front, leaving another set of priorities and people, frankly, to the rear. And that's not healthy either. So I think that this has to be about really methodically looking at what we have in place that is not working for any of us, white, black, anyone. And understanding that, the same thing I would often say when I worked in Boston Public Schools, it's not a pie, right? There's not only 6 pieces, like we can all be in this together. There's not, your child does not get dumber because my child gets into their really good school. We can all be a part of this, and we can all thrive and benefit from it. And we will.
And what are some ways you think to help folks understand that this isn't a zero-sum game, right? Because that's often what it comes down to, right? That if somebody is benefiting, I'm somehow losing or will lose. So what are the things that you do? I mean, we certainly try to help people understand the system, right? That we're all a part of this system. Talk about how really, when you look at organizations that are more diverse, how everybody benefits. Sometimes that gets through, but sometimes it doesn't. Are there other, things that you've done or thinking about to kind of help folks understand this as more than a zero-sum game?
Sure. I mean, we are a capitalist society. I think at the end of the day, understanding the business proposition for not getting this right is important. And I think the numbers are real. When I worked in a different industry that was about footwear, and making sure that you had a consumer base that knew that you were dropping a new sneaker every 6 weeks. Like they had to know that because they had to buy it. And if they didn't buy it, then you weren't going to make enough money to, continue to push forward $1 billion industry or company for that sake. And that meant all colors were welcome. That meant all money was green. And and so there's something there. I think there's something important about that. That was similarly the conversation at the museum, right? Because we were really reliant upon international visitors prior to the pandemic. That was a huge part of the Boston economy. And then all of a sudden it went away, and we found ourselves really focused on having to understand the Boston market. That means that, you know, you start to understand that at any point in time, everybody needs to be a part of your market if you are going to survive. And I think that's true for all of us.
Great, thank you. I'm going to look at some questions. I see there's a question. How do you envision and suggest sharing images of Black joy outside of exclusive spaces like art galleries?
Social media. You know, we're all still in the land of Zoom, screensavers. I think that, you know, you can really think about telling the stories, like when you're in a moment and you sort of highlight that one thing that happened, you know, just tell the good story. I love Pebbles, who's on the air on 96.9, has this like the good story day. It's really sweet, but you know, it like makes you smile. I think we still have to tell the truthful stories. Those are not going to go away, but I think we could serve ourselves to lift up the work that's happening. That's really positive.
Great. It was also making me think of the second date update. I guess that really is related, but anywho, I love listening to that too.
Me on that station. Morning, this is our morning ritual on the way to school.
So are there questions for Dr. McCreery? Because I'm happy to open it up. Dominique, do you want folks to put them in the chat for me to raise, or should people just unmute?
I was going to send them to you in the chat, but no one has sent them in yet. But feel free to send them in and I will send them your way.
Okay, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I mean, you don't get this opportunity often. So Makeeba, is there anything that I did not ask you that you want to make sure you share with our audience today?
Yeah, I would say that there's 19 founders for the New Commonwealth Fund. There's several other allies, but there is room at the table, and we are would love to have more partners involved in making sure that we get this work done. Again, you know, week 9, but most folks, I'll put my email in the chat. You know, people, let's get together and do this together.
Question, 2 questions. Are there any potential synergies between the work that the fund is doing and the Ujima Project?
Sure, absolutely. I have a lot of respect for the Ujima Project. We're just in nascent conversations, and I'd say that I've, you know, tracked their work prior to being at the New Commonwealth Fund, but I think we're really interested in thinking about how we leave the door open for investment models that are not necessarily your traditional way of thinking about raising funds. You know, how you get to that 100 million, if that's the number, is absolutely going to happen outside of your sort of typical corporate or foundation investment, I think. And so I think Ujima has some really interesting models for that as well as other folks that are doing work in that space.
I have this to share that Nia Evans, who started Ujima, is a LeadBoston alum. So another plug for LeadBoston and the things that the people that come out of that program and the ideas. Another.
Sharon wants to say something.
Sharon Jones.
Well, I can answer.
I'm sorry. I've been having a day today. Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm not part of any organization. I'm part of the community. And so this was something that I came across, and I was interested to see what the conversation was about. And so I'd like to offer, for what little I do know, that it has to do with the racial equality overall. And if we're talking about African Americans in particularly, not to be inclusive or to negate from the other communities of color. I'm sorry, I didn't say that correctly. I haven't eaten all day and I came to do this right after work, so I'm scrambling. I just would like to say though, some of the discriminations I think that goes unrecognized, and I just wanted to put it out there to think a little differently. A lot of times when the jobs are advertised, oftentimes they require that you be bilingual. And a lot of us who are African American only speak English. And or if we had a different language from my generation, most of us don't speak that other language. So I just wanted to make mention of that, as well as, and I don't know if I'm out of line, and somebody please let me know if I'm in the wrong meeting.
Sharon, continue to speak your truth, please.
Okay. So the other thing is that when the pitches oftentimes go out social media, on TV, in the commercials, they don't have two Black parents. It's oftentimes now the norm is that one of the parents are Caucasian, one may be Black or light-skinned Black, or, it's not a whole family with the mother and the father and the child. This is becoming a thing. And so it makes me think that much further, that I just don't want the African American to get lost in all of the racial equality that we're looking for. Because sometimes I think I haven't heard that piece. Let me just put it that way. That's something that I don't hear a lot. And when I've mentioned it, people look at me funny. And it's really uncomfortable for me because my family speaks another language and I don't. I'm up in age and things are changing in real time. And so for me as a woman, as a mother who's raised her children, etc., sometimes I feel a little left out of the loop because, the systemic part of it all, long story short. And then, I'm not invited into the room. So my voice doesn't get heard when I say, I've been working in nonprofit for a long time, and a lot of the jobs that I'd be interested in oftentimes say bilingual preferred. So I don't even apply. So I just wanted that to be a part of it. And if there is a household that's being, if there's a community event, because as a community, all is welcome, always has been in the Black community. I don't know that there's necessarily in our community a systemic thing. We take in everybody. And so I don't want us to get lost in the, embracing everybody else when we open the doors for all the other community members that we love so much, and not be in the photograph, or the children or the household or the family is not intact when you know what I mean? When it's mortalized, right? And then and I don't know how people are gonna hear this, and I apologize if I offend anybody. But, one of my other concerns is that we do a lot of mixed racing, and I'm still talking about the African American, okay? And so a lot of my family members who are mixed race, they don't see color, or a lot of them don't see Black or white. So there goes that.
All right. Well, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing what you've shared, and also sharing about your experience and some of the challenges. And Makeeba, I don't know if there's any something that you want to say to what Sharon has raised.
Well, Sharon, I can only speak my own truth, which is I'm mixed race and I see Black and white all the time. But I also see you, and I hear you on the bilingual issue. That's actually something that hadn't really struck me before. And so I thank you for raising it, because it does exclude in a way that, those of us who are not going to pick up a second language at this point, it would struggle. But I put my email in the chat, and I welcome a further conversation with you and certainly with anybody.
Thank you. And I'll just also add that I think it is important to not lump all people of color together, right? We all have different experiences, both as individuals and as groups. And so I think, it's important to think about what is the experience, particularly depending on the hue of your skin, because even if you identify as Latinx, you may have a similar experience to somebody who may identify as Black because of skin color. And so I think it's also, it's important to think about how different identities are impacted by systemic racism, not to, try to prioritize one or the other, but understand that people are treated differently by the identities that they hold. And it's important to understand how those intersections play out. So thank you for sharing that, Sharon. Other question, what are some examples of what white people can do in their own community aside from personal conversations?
I mean, I'm gonna let you take this one too, Beth, but I have to say, children, right? Like I had so many of my white friends who were parents reach out to me during the pandemic and post Mr. Floyd's murder to say, what can I do? And I said, raise your child to respect other people, regardless of the color of their skin, their neighborhood they come from, the languages that they speak. That to me would solve every single problem. Let's just get a full generation that does not believe that there has to be power over another human being, in particular, because of the color of their skin.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many things that people can do, particularly white people. So certainly, have conversations with your kids about race and what it means. How does it show up? And ensure that they are not treating other people differently because of it. I think taking a look at the organization in which you work and use your agency as somebody in that organization to say, hey, I'm seeing something that doesn't make sense here. Look at, who's in power in this organization, who's getting promoted, and talk about that. And, be intentional in your organization about what's happening. And if something doesn't seem right, say something and work with others to make a difference. Oftentimes people can see it, but they don't do anything about it, but we all can do something about it. So I think part of it too is, look in your organization, look in your place of worship, look, in other places in community. When you're, seeing something that doesn't make sense, it's not working, that's leaving people out, do say something about it. You can take a role in that. Question, Makeeba, you stated that power finds itself into movements/organizations. Oops, the question moved. Oh, could you expand on the relevance of that point and concerns it poses in dismantling enduring racism?
Sure, I think it's just a really tough trap to not fall into, particularly when you're in a philanthropic sector. Many people would say, and I think there's some truth to the fact that philanthropy really has been structured and organized historically to protect wealth. And once you sort of step away from that, you have to figure out what it's actually in place for. And certainly there's nothing wrong with wanting to build a base, build a bench of resources, but the more you hold on to it, right, then the more you become the keeper, then the power structure and the differentials really start to get into play. So, racism inherently is about power. It's about, who has the ability to direct another individual, another human being's outcomes. And that just even unto itself sounds crazy to say out loud, but that's what we are up against. So I think you always have to be very careful that you don't fall into what I call the Frodo's ring trap, right? Which is if you are blessed enough to be in a position where you're able to bring resources or help or support to 1, 2, 20, 50 people or communities or neighborhoods, that you don't wear that ring too long and start to forget that it's actually something to be shared. And I think the more that you can empower other folks to own what they already have, their own power, and to let that sort of see some light, which means you have to get out of the way, then you're doing your best not to fall into that trap. It's tough. It's really hard. And we sometimes, we allow it to happen to ourselves as well. So I think part of my work, right, is to also encourage the entities and the organizations and the individuals that we're investing in to not fall into that trap, to not play that role.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And Jeff F.Y.R.E has a comment on the zero-sum aspect. So Jeff, I'll give you the floor.
A short, brief thing, but thanks so much. And Makeeba, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually. I hope we get a chance, as we said, to actually lift a glass of whatever together in person at some point. And I just wanted to say that the point you raised about the zero sum is so important because so many people do see it that way. So I don't know how many economists there are on the call. I'm one of them. And I would say from an economics perspective, as well as from a human perspective, it is not a zero-sum game. If we're successful, all of us together, in removing the barriers that have kept people of color from accumulating wealth, from attaining stable employment at reasonable compensation, from taking on leadership roles and so on, then the size of the economy grows. The economic pie gets larger. It's just good for everyone in the end. I think the sooner that some people can see that, the more successful we're going to be. So thanks for raising that issue along with many others. I really appreciate your remarks this evening.
Sure, rising tides lift all boats, right?
It's kind of like that, yeah.
So on that note, I'm going to, Makeeba, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Really appreciated your remarks and the conversation. And I probably could go on for a little longer with you, and hopefully we will do that another time. But I don't want to stay in the way of the rest of the meeting. So thank you again, really appreciate it. And I think Alona is next.
Thanks, Beth. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. That's a hard act to follow, but I am introducing two fantastic people, so that I've got that going for me. As chair of the governance committee and on behalf of fellow committee members Trish Cotter and Robin Van Ricke and our chair Marguerite, I'm thrilled to welcome these two fantastic individuals to the YWCA board. John Anderson is Global Head of Corporate Finance at Manulife. John is here with us today. And in that role, he is the investment officer for the Manulife family of life insurance companies, including Manulife Canada, Manulife Asia, and John Hancock. He is active in the company's DE&I efforts, working to increase racial and gender equity in recruiting, acting as senior participant in the White Allies Club, and sponsor of the Veterans Employees Group. Prior to Manulife, John was Vice President of Corporate Finance at JP Morgan Chase. And before that, he served as an intelligence officer with the CIA. I think it's fair to say that he brings a varied set of skills to the YW. John received his MBA from Georgetown University and his bachelor's from the University of Chicago. Vicki Levy is principal with Monitor Deloitte's strategy group. And in this role, she leads a global life sciences practice and one of Deloitte's most important global pharmaceutical company relationships. Vicki has recently moved back to Boston after living and working in Switzerland with her family for the last 4 years. There, she led Deloitte's healthcare and life sciences practice and was a member of Deloitte's European executive team. With over 20 years of experience in life sciences and healthcare, Vicki helps clients define their strategy and transform their organizations, working with them to mobilize their growth, innovation, and reinvention. We're very excited to have Vicki bring all of that strategic experience and talent to the YW. Before joining Deloitte, Vicki held roles at Monitor Company, Procter & Gamble, and Lehman Brothers. She received her MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and her bachelor's from Amherst College. Please join us in welcoming John and Vicki to the YWCA community. We're so thrilled to have you both. Finally, I'm happy to introduce our officers for the coming year. Marguerite Fletcher, our intrepid board chair, Robin Van Ricke for vice chair, Robin Shin as clerk, and Suzanne Aber as our treasurer. That's it for me from my report from the governance committee. Back to you, Beth.
over to Marguerite first, I think.
All right. Thank you, Alona. Appreciate that. And, big warm welcome to both Vicky and John. Really looking forward to working with you both. So Alona got to do the more fun part. She got to welcome new people. I'm supposed to say goodbye to 2 board members who've just been absolutely fantastic, but I've decided I'm not going to say goodbye. So I'll just say they're rolling off the board for now, but it's not goodbye, because I know both of them are so passionate about YW Boston that they're not going to leave us. They'll remain connected. So Sherry Santamont and Julia Lanham are rolling off the board this year. And so I just want to say a few things about Julia, and then Beth is going to say a few things about Sherry. And I had notes, but I'm going to dispense with them. Julia and I started together 2018. We joined together, and I remember meeting her at new board member orientation. And I was struck by her warmth, her intelligence, her passion for this work. I remember us walking to our cars together afterwards, talking about the work and thinking, wow, she's really nice. I like her so much. And Julia just hit the ground running, and she joined the fund committee. And within no time, she was a co-chair of the fund committee, and she was filling tables at AWA and at Elevating Lives and recommending people for LeadBoston. She was just constantly doing things. So, then when I was in need of a vice chair, it was a really easy choice, I have to share. I just said, hey, Julia, would you be interested? And I was thrilled she said yes. So she was a great partner for the last couple of years. It's really, really hard to see her go, but you know what? She got a great promotion at work. So I'm really happy for her with that. And, she's got 2 kids, she's got a lot going on. So we can't force her to stay, unfortunately. But as I said, this is not goodbye. This is just off the board, hopefully for a moment. And Julia, just know that we're all waiting to welcome you back at any time that you want to come back. So we will miss you, but we know you're not far away. So thank you so, so much for everything. All right, Beth, over to you for Sherry.
Yes. So Sherry Santamont has been on the board, I think, for 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I often talk about Sherry in many of the new staff orientation when I talk with potential new board members, because I share that Sherry was actually a part of the YWCA system up in Maine when she was in high school. And she, at that time, there was something known as the One Imperative, which was to eliminate racism by any means necessary. And Sherry shared with me at AWA when she moved to Boston that she really wanted to get involved with YW Boston because she remembered the One Imperative from her work when she was a high schooler up in Maine, and had been connected with YWCAs ever since. And so I share that story often with people about Sherry and her connection to the work of the YWCAs. She has been a tremendous asset to the YW board, the YW Boston board. Sherry joined as part of the fund development committee and co-chaired that committee for several years. One of her passions is advocacy. So when we started the advocacy committee, Sherry joined as the board liaison for the advocacy committee. She was instrumental in supporting our efforts in the Yes on 3 campaign last year. She got us in the advocacy committee involved in registering people to vote. There was supposed to be a campaign to do that, to be canvassing on foot. Because of COVID, that wasn't possible. Knowing the importance of the election and people turning out to vote, Sherry was actively involved in calling people and getting other folks on the YW board and advocacy committee to do that work as well. So we are just so appreciative for everything Sherry has contributed to the organization and helping particularly our nascent advocacy work grow. I have already introduced Sherry to the YWCA folks down in DC, where she will be relocating, and our loss is certainly their gain. So Sherry, thank you again. And Julia, thank you for all that you've done. You will certainly, both of you will certainly be missed by us, and very difficult shoes for folks to fill. So again, thank you. We will be sending you both a little something on behalf of the organization. And now I want to thank everybody for participating in our annual meeting. It was great to see you, those that were on camera, great to see you visually. I hope next year we are able to see each other in person. So thank you again for being here with us tonight, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your evening.